and I've finally done it, taking any shape, animation or footage and using it to cut out a pumpkin, or any object you like. I'll show you exactly how to create it with 15 spooky tips along the way. We need 3 comps to start this. First, the cutout. We'll use a face, but it could be anything. We just need it to be on a transparent background. Then the inside of the pumpkin. I'll use some stock footage of a fire with an orange background and the outside skin of the pumpkin. I've drawn this in Procreate. Those all go in one main comp. We'll use the cutout comp as a matte for our pumpkin skin, so we can see the flame through whatever is in our cutout comp. Those are all the ingredients we need. Everything from here is the fun stuff, combining these with lots of different effects and techniques in creative ways to get the final result. For the 3D effect to get the thickness of the pumpkin, I created another comp called Cutout Thick. We'll place our cutout comp in there and add the effect Fill. We'll click Invert, so now we have a window. That is the first spooky tip. Fill plus invert to flip the transparency. To make it look 3D, I duplicated it. I'll change its fill color to make it more visible. And on the bottom layer, I will scale it down to around 84%, which looks close, but we do have these gaps between the layers that doesn't look solid. So we need more layers. So we'll duplicate that bottom layer 8 times to make 10 in total, and I'll increase the scale on each one by 2%. And that looks much better, more 3D, but we still do have some gaps and jagged edges, but we'll fix that next. Back in the main comp, we'll drag that newly made cutout thick comp to the middle of our other layers, and to smooth out those ridges, we are going to add the effect Simple Choker. We'll increase the choke matte, which eats into the edge of that layer, and while doing that, most importantly, smooths it out. We'll leave that around 5. And to reverse the shrinking of that layer, we can just duplicate that simple choker and change that 5 to -5. So it pushes it back out, but keeps it very smooth. I also added those effects to the cutout comp being used as a matte to soften those corners just a little bit. Now for the shading on that thickness layer. We'll add a fill effect and turn it a nice orange color, which will be its base. And for the shading, we'll first duplicate our original cutout comp at the top. We'll add a fill, invert it, make that a darker color, put that below the skin. We'll change its mode to multiplier, and we'll add the effect radial blur. We'll set the blur type to zoom and the amount to maybe 40, so we get a nice dark gradient towards the center. Here's what that layer looks like on its own. Now some of it will leak over the edges over our fire, which we don't want, so we will use the cutout thick as a matte to keep it in place, and we'll turn that thick layer back on, and it's restricted to just that edge of the pumpkin. To make an even stronger edge separating it from the pumpkin skin, let's duplicate it. We'll turn the blur quite a bit down to around 5, and if that's too strong, we can lower the opacity of that layer a little bit. There, a nice extra bit of separation. For the light illuminating the thickness from the fire inside, let's duplicate our cutout thick comp, place that over our shading. I'll call that thick highlights because we always label our layers. I'll change the fill to a bright yellow and invert that one, and we'll add a slightly different effect. We are going to add CC Radial Fast Blur, not the simple radial blur. This effect is great for pushing gradients outwards from the center. The default 50 here is actually pretty good. And to make it brighter, we will just change that layer's blending mode to add. Now we don't want this covering up our flames, so again we'll use the cutout thick comp as a matte. Now this doesn't quite get into these corners, so let's now duplicate that comp, and this comp is our cutout thick comp, which when inverted gives us the smallest mouth shape, the one inside closest to the flame. But to fill these gaps, we want the larger cutout shape that is closer to us. So instead we will use our original cutout comp. So we can replace our cutout thick comp with the original cutout comp by having it selected in the timeline, then holding Alter option, selecting just the cutout and dragging it anywhere on the timeline or even in the comp window and releasing. So it replaces that comp but keeps all the same effects and the mattes applied to it. We can see it's getting into those corners just a little, but we wanted a bit more, so let's increase that way up. Let's go to around 83. That seems to work. Maybe a bit higher, 85. Let's treat ourselves. And if that's too strong, we can always drop down the opacity of that layer if we need to. Now I would also like some light from the fire glowing outwards beyond the edge of our face, creating visible light rays. This will require another comp. So I'll select our pumpkin interior comp in the project panel, and drag that onto the new composition icon, which will create a new comp with the same length and dimensions with our selected comp already inside it. And I'll call that one interior only. Then I'll drag our cutout comp in too, and we want the fire just inside this face. And there are many ways we could do this, like using it as a matte, but we can also set the cutout's blending mode to stencil alpha all the way hidden down here. And that makes this layer act like a matte, and anything underneath it disappears wherever this layer is opaque. So if we've got a bunch of layers below, they will all be cut out by that stencil alpha layer. This is super handy if you already have lots of layers with mattes applied. And there is also silhouette alpha for the inverse, but we want stencil. Now we can drag that into our main comp over the top of everything. We'll add a CC radial fast blur, push this way up around 80-ish, and we'll set its blending mode to overlay. Now the light rays are really streaming out. We can lower its opacity to taste. I don't want it too strong. And another thing I want to do is add a little edge highlight to the pumpkin skin to give it an extra bit of depth. So I'll duplicate our cutout comp, turn its visibility back on, and add the effect Bevel Alpha. Now this adds a highlight and a shadow to opposite edges. And normally it can look quite goofy, but if we keep it very subtle, we can get away with it to add a nice sharpness to the image. I'll add a fill effect above this set to black and set the layers blending mode to screen. So now we just get that highlight. I will eyedrop a lighter orange color from the background and bump up the light intensity. We can play with the direction a bit. I think I like it coming from below because that's how the pumpkin skin is lit from below, and it looks like it's just catching the very bottom edge of the skin. And now we've really got a lot of color information that creates depth and separates these layers of the pumpkin itself. And before we put the final effects in this main comp, let's look at how we can enhance our cutout comp and really bring it to life. So we've got our face, but we can animate it so it behaves a little bit like a stop motion animation without any keyframes. So let's open up our shape layers contents, and here we can add a wiggle paths. And this will make the paths of our shape, well, wiggle. We do want to tweak some settings though. Let's put the size up to around 20. The detail, we'll put that way down to 0, maybe 0.5. We are not accurate pumpkin slicers here. And we'll change the wiggles per second up to maybe 6, so it'll wiggle quite a bit there. And to make each one of these wiggles snap into place, I'm going to add the effect posterize time and set that to 6 frames per second. So now we've got a nice chunky animated boil. And of course that flows through all the effects and comps up into our main comp. I love to see the light rays in particular react to that changing shape. Now I also want our cutout to curve around the surface of our pumpkin a little, and that's easy to do down in our cutout comp. First, I will add a new adjustment layer to put all our effects on, and the first effect we'll add is grid. We'll bump up the border a little bit and turn the transparency off just to see better what we're doing, and that's all this grid is for. So then we'll add the effect Bezier Warp, which adds these wonderful Bezier handles that we can quickly adjust to make this more pumpkin shaped, or any shape we want really. Now if we turn that grid off, we can see our Bezier Warp isn't really adjusting our face too much because it is dead center. But remember, anything we add into this comp is cut out of our pumpkin. So if we keep the grid effect on and head into our main comp, we can see we have cut our pumpkin into perfect slices, and it is nicely warped around the pumpkin form. Now, it was through testing this with the grid effect that I found out just how cool this looked, and really showed off the 3D-ness of the effect and looked like a spreadsheet from hell. But the grid effect by itself is underrated. Even if you just animate some of the basic properties, the border thickness, and the cell size, you can get something that looks pretty captivating, even before you put it in pumpkin hell mode. You can even invert the grid as well. There are a few more effects I want to add to polish off the main comp. First is some texture. I'll import a looping texture of mine. Feel free to take this and use it, but instead of using a blending mode to just make what's below it darker or lighter, I want to have total control to make this texture any color I like. So to do that, we'll add the extract effect, which gives us this little graph, a histogram. And this shows us that most of the values in this layer are very dark. And if we drag this rectangle from the top left corner, it will start extracting those values, leaving us with just the brightest ones, these few speckles that don't even show up in the graph. But if we pull this bottom left corner of the rectangle back again, it introduces some more of those dark values, but at a lower opacity. So these darker values have a low opacity and they get higher until they're totally opaque at the brighter ones. Now let's add our favorite fill effect. And we can see it's already colored all those light values. Let's make it a nice orange to match and vary the histogram of that extract effect to get as much or as little texture as we like. Now I want to give an overall flicker to the outside of our pumpkin. So let's go into the pumpkin exterior skin comp. So to add some flicker, my favorite method of doing this is to duplicate our layer, add a curves effect, and make the lights a little bit brighter, the darks a little bit darker. And then on the opacity of this layer, we're going to Alt Option click the stopwatch to add a wiggle expression. We'll give it a frequency of 8 and an amplitude of 50. So 8 times a second, it will fluctuate randomly up to 50%. I will turn the starting opacity down to 50, so that 50% will go anywhere from 0 to 100. And now we have a light flicker, and we can adjust how severe it is by using the curves effect. Let's keep it pretty subtle though. The last effects I want to add on a new adjustment layer over the top of everything are going to be my go-tos. If you've seen my videos, you've seen these before. I am going to add a gate weave using a transform effect, which is that slight shake I explained in full in this video. A little bit of grain with noise HLS auto to tie it all together and give it a bit of a gritty mood. And the post-rise time set to 12 frames per second to give the motion that stuttery sparkle and make it feel a little more hand-drawn and tactile. But remember, this final result is all controlled by our one cutout layer. So as a bonus tip, if you want to put other footage elements into this comp, you can do that. Green screen footage works great. You do want it quite chunky though. If it has a lot of fine detail, like this skeleton doing karate, all that detail will get lost in the effects. Now this effect all works on the alpha channel of this layer, so we do need a transparent background. But to help you use regular footage with no transparent layer, I've created a new adjustment layer to help you do that called Extract Transparency. It's got a few effects, so I'll turn them on one by one to show you what they do. The threshold effect turns your footage into just black and white, but it does have lots of fine detail, so I've added a blur effect before that to simplify it and make it a bit chunkier. Vary both of these to suit your footage. And then I've got two extract effects. We have Extract White, which will pull out all the white values, and we have Extract Black to pull out all the black values. You only need one of them, depending on which color you want cut out. And that'll look something like this. Now there are a lot of effects on layers in this project, so it is not going to preview in real time. And for your taste, you might not need all of these effects. You might want a flatter 2D look, which will render much quicker. But I really like to push it in these videos to show you as many different approaches to different animation problems that you can use and apply to your own projects beyond this. There is a lot of info I packed into this video, but this is all in that project file, so you can explore it at your leisure and dissect it. And if you want the fullest motion design experience I offer, from learning the perfect motion and timing to advanced compositing, you can enroll in my courses. I designed Motion Foundation to be the best place to solidify a practical understanding and application of motion design principles and techniques, whilst building a portfolio of projects along the way. The students have created absolutely brilliant projects in that course. I am never not amazed by the output. I also have an advanced animation course and a design course as well if you're already confident with the tools and need something to take it to that next level. You can learn more and enroll at benmarriott.com. Thanks so much for watching.